Up next, please welcome Mackenzie Morris, Senior Industrial Consultant at Dragos. Mackenzie will present Better, Not Best Practices.
All right. Hello, everyone. They were really not joking about how bright that light is on the stage. So bear with me while I have to avert my gaze. So thanks for coming to my talk. Okay, that's how many people are in the room. So just a quick minute about myself, and then we'll get into it. We only have 30 minutes, so we're just going to be running through the content as fast as possible. I work at Dragos. My name is Mackenzie Morris. My name is spelled like Machinize, which is as a result of a spelling error in my birth certificate, which is just caused so many problems. But an old chemical engineer that moved into cybersecurity by happenstance. I love Delta V. It's a personal passion of mine. I hate ladder logic, and then now I do cybersecurity. And as a consultant, my main job is to work with organizations to create maturity roadmaps and basically decide how are we going to get to whatever goal that we're trying to achieve. And this presentation is mostly about the 40 to 50 customers in organizations that I've worked with and something that I've noticed, which is that we as an organization, either as a vendor or as customers, need to change the way that we do business, and we need to change the perspective. How many organizations have a defined, engineered solution that you submitted your functional requirements, you got your $4, $5, $8, $12 million one-off solution, and now that vendor requires like TeamViewer access, and if you don't, capitulate, then they're not going to give you any support. And what we see quite often is that organizations do not put cybersecurity into the procurement language. They don't do the negotiations for requirements up front, or because cybersecurity and OT is not necessarily like an age-old practice, you are left with all of these solutions, all these legacy items, or all these legacy support contracts that you have to sort of drag along with you. Because as a consumer or as an end user or an asset owner, you have all of the negotiating power up front when you're buying the thing. And then after the fact, you sort of just have to like take what your vendor gives you because you already own the product until your next cycle or your refresh. So we need to sort of change how we do business, and vendors need to come and meet the customers where they are. So we can't be prescribing best practices, because if you can't even get out of bed in the morning, then we shouldn't be telling you to run a marathon. And the example that I gave is that we tell you to do network segmentation or micro-segmentation or zero trust, but if we don't even know how many assets we have, then how are we even going to start to create firewall rules or create zones or access? So the case study that we're doing today is there are 3 organizations, 3 case studies that we sort of worked through, where we went into a sort of a mid-ground solution between what might necessarily be the best practice and what would be considered nothing. And so you're having a cybersecurity professional tell you that it's okay not to be perfect. We're just going to try to be better. And so there's a crawl, walk, run model, which is brought on by the maturity models for like C2M2 or CCMC, and specifically CCMC with their new certification model for like level 1, 2, and 3 has been really popular with companies. But the thing that, and don't get me wrong, this is mostly a 30-minute session of me complaining about current practices in cybersecurity, but maturity models are great for framing the discussion, but you're setting a base standard across every single industrial vertical, every single industrial company. That might not be like the perfect one-size-fits-all solution. Maturity models mostly talk or describe functions or standards, but they don't tell you how to get there. They don't tell you, if asset categorization or asset lists or inventory is requirements. They don't tell you how to do it. They don't tell you how to gather up all that information or validate it, or what type of information should be tagged to each asset, or how you're even going to use that information. It just tells you sort of the end goal, not how to get there or what to do with it. So we need to ask ourselves, okay, maturity models, they tell us to do things, but are we asking ourselves the right questions as companies? Are these the right models or fits for us? one of the things about cybersecurity is, and I was being increasingly incendiary the other day, where in manufacturing right now, if you're a manufacturing company and you haven't figured out how to rebuild your entire environment for ransomware, then you're not doing risk-based cybersecurity. Because we just did 1 year, 2022, and we had 470 incidents of ransomware in manufacturing companies. 74% of all cyber incidents were ransomware related. So if you're a manufacturing company, your threat analysis should be, we're not worried about China, we're not worried about Iran, we're not worried about Brazil, we're not worried about America, we're only worried about ransomware, because that's where the threat is. Your attack surface should, and your practices should mirror the environment that you're going to be working in. So your security controls should be directly correlated to the threats that you're trying to fix. So the 3 case studies we're talking about are network segmentation, remote access, backup, and recovery. So first off, I saw someone mention that if you ever talked about the Purdue model, you didn't know anything about network segmentation, which, network segmentation, there's a lot to talk about, and everyone wants to get, and there's a lot of vendors out there that will definitely talk to you about network segmentation, where I have witnessed in organizations that were the least segmented environment, where every PLC had a domain-connected IP address. And I just came back from a manufacturing facility where they had 1 VLAN per an asset, and every single network connection had its own access control, and it was the most micro-segmented environment that you have. There is something in between that, and the caliber of your network segmentation is usually going to fall on how good your networking team is or how much time you have to put into it. So I'm going to tell you that it is OK to take all your assets and put them on one side of a firewall, and take all of the assets and put them on the other side of the firewall, IT and OT. There's some disagreement on what an IT and OT asset is, but if it supports your process, or if it went down and it would affect your production, it's an OT asset. So JDD and SAP are probably 2 of the biggest OT assets in the world. But the reason that I talk to companies who are trying to figure out how to start network segmentation, and going to a model like this, where you just put all of your OT assets on one flat network behind a firewall, is because it sets you up to actually do cybersecurity. We need a starting point. We can't just jump into microsegmentation. We can't just jump into silos where each individual production line is on its own VLAN. We need to start at some sort of starting point. Once you put all network, all OT assets on one side of a firewall, you can start doing things like, OK, we've actually created an environment that we can monitor because we have segmentation between OT and IT. We can now start figuring out what OT assets talk to what enterprise assets are OT adjacent, or are they actually OT assets and we miscategorized them the first time. We can start creating those firewall rules. We can do ingress, egress. We can map the behavior. We can limit ports, protocols, and services. But we can't do any of that if we don't set up some sort of bifurcated environment. We can start breaking the OT environment into their microcosms based on processes, but we don't know what any of the technology does. So I push organizations to do that asset identification, to basically just take a network sliver, run through every single endpoint that's talking on the network, and say, is this an OT asset or is this an IT asset? What do we think it's going to be? And then push everything into an environment. Perimeter defense, I don't know if anyone's ever heard the term like hard shell, soft inside with OT. Perimeter defense is really good. I know that, especially as a security vendor, we always talk about there's no silver bullet, and there is not. But perimeter defense is good. The organizations that are set up to create firewalls are strong are strong companies. And going to one layer of defense is important because it helps you create the pathway to move on to bigger and better success. Network segmentation sort of leads directly into remote access. This is a manufacturing organization that we worked with. A couple of different numbers from the the Dragos OT Watch team, which is the managed service organization within Dragos. So 90% of organizations have some sort of remote access. 60% of them have more than 4 types of remote access, and 20% had 7 different types of remote access capabilities or mechanisms. 30% of these environments didn't have session timeout or any logging. So this is sort of what the reality looks like. We have all of your individual OT vendors that sold you, a laser or a CNC machine that's a one-off that needs their team viewer or log me in remote access. And they get that remote access through a couple different avenues, but typically they're demanding that they get to use their version of remote access. And so in this environment, we had 7. I know I only put up 5, but I don't want it to run off the slide. So we had 7 different remote access capabilities going in to connect to their individual machines. So Beyond Trust, Log Me In, all the different types. And there was no way to monitor or control this. You have a security team of 2 or 3 guys. And so the best practice would be for us to use some sort of external connection. Maybe the vendor is connecting into the corporate VPN. There would be a jump server or a terminal server for them to connect to a jump box. And then on that last jump box, you'd be able to connect to an OT environment jump box, or maybe even directly RDP to the asset. Well, that's really nice, but that's kind of complicated. And if you've already purchased a very expensive piece of equipment that was an engineered solution, and they don't want to use anything other than TeamViewer, you're not going to be able to deploy anything like this. So we came up with 2 examples, which is essentially just like remote access encapsulation, where we said you can either use your corporate environment VPN, where you'd ask the remote access, or the vendors to remote access into the corporate environment to a terminal server that had role-based access controls, and that would give them a virtual box that would have their preferred remote access criteria if the end box was managed by them. And then they would be able to do like TeamViewer from the virtual server, the terminal server, directly to their individual solution. And the reason that we wanted to set up something like this is that we'd actually create the network monitoring and the choke point to sort of view what all of the external access was doing. The other example is essentially the very reverse of this, where we let everyone use their individual remote access solutions to connect to a terminal server, once again with role-based access controls, and then there was a single icon on the desktop, which was just a single RDP instance to the end unit. So this was allowing us, or PuTTY in one case, and this allowed us to create the environment or the choke point to get visibility to sort of wrangle in the multi-headed Hydra that was all these different vendor solutions. This is not a perfect solution. It's not even a great solution. It's just a workable solution. It's something that we were able to convince the vendors to meet us halfway and compromise on, and add layers of security controls to not allow just rampant remote access into the environment. Next, backup and recovery. So I talked earlier about how crazy manufacturing has been the last year and how that's a really big problem. For remote access and data loss, we want to understand what does it take to get the environment back up. That's the most important thing. If you were to run an exercise or a fire drill or a tabletop, and you lost your environment today, what would be the key items that you need to back up your environment? So some questions that we ask ourselves when creating backup solutions is, what's the recovery process? Where do we back up the information? What do we back up? Do we need to back up everything? Is some of it vendor-installed software? Can we just reinstall it from an installation disk? Is there any redundancy? Are we using some sort of RAID solution or a SAN or Paragon to back up images? What's our backup solution currently look like? And how redundant is it? So a cool, interesting feature of a lot of distributed control systems is that they're essentially just vendor installed solutions that with a single hard drive on it that has all of your graphics, all of your faceplates, all of your logic, all of your process control information is loaded into a single database. It's not perfect solution, but you can just back up that single database onto an external hard drive every day, and then if push comes to shove, you can rebuild the entire environment from the installation disks, which will take you a while. And for some people who have ever had to do anything like that, it's a terrible week. But it's possible, and it's a lot better than losing your entire environment to some sort of ransomware instance. So how long does it take to rebuild your environment from scratch? What are the control systems? Is there a specific database? Do you just need to copy the C drive onto an external hard drive? With Delta V, you can do it from the D drive. So you back up the D drive. There is a backup and recovery solution inside of the control system, but you can just do a Windows file copy on the D drive onto an external drive, and that is everything you need to rebuild your environment, minus one or two things. Last is, so that's like 9/10 of the battle right there. The last thing is, have we ever tested it? Have we ever done a dry run? Luckily, my first week in my career, I accidentally blew up a Delta V system by installing Symantec on it. And then I got to experience what it was like to rebuild the Delta V system. I think I was maybe 3 weeks into being a process control engineer. So I have had that experience, and it was a very enlightening one. And because we couldn't use the vendor-supplied backup and recovery system, we came up with the idea that we would just put hard drives on top of every single Delta V box and back up the D drive so that we could just come back and rebuild the environment. So it was just good enough. Wasn't great, wasn't perfect, wasn't best in class. It was just good enough. And so, yeah, we used the Windows solution. So created a task that ran every day, and we would run the environment to back up the external drive. So I just ran through this really fast because I skipped over a ton of things that I wanted to talk about. So I'm just going to go back and talk about them now. I'm not one for stage presentations. My preferred modality for communicating with individuals is over a beer at the bar, very one-on-one, instead of looking into the literal sun. So the reason I wanted to come up here and present this presentation is I want us, if you're an asset owner or if you're a security vendor, I want us to think about how we can make better solutions that meet customers halfway, because the whole point of OT cybersecurity is to keep the lights on and the water running. We want to keep gas to heat our homes, and we want to be able to have fuel to drive our cars. Security vendors are asking asset owners constantly to buy. We want the money that you guys have to provide because we want to have successful businesses, and you guys need to have secure environments. If your security vendors are not willing to meet you halfway up front before you buy their solution, then where are they going to be when you're in a pinch or there's a problem? Well, you've already paid for their product. They don't really need to get your good graces after the fact. You already paid. So you should be demanding your security vendors, your OT vendors, your OEMs, for their services upfront. There's no other way around it, and they should have to put their money where their mouth is. So that includes my own company. That includes every other company. Very passionate about the topic, but I know that we have a lot of time, and I would like to ask if anyone had anything that they wanted to talk about. I think I see a hand. Yeah, there we go. This light is real bright.
Hey, Mackenzie, it's Schleif. We had a beer last night, so
yeah.
we got a little deep in, if you remember that. Hey, I was curious, have you guys looked at, when you go out to companies, look at and doing a comparative analysis on contract amendments to hold the vendors a little bit more accountable, comparatively speaking, to something that would occur down the road? In other words, like you stated, hey, you're going to be, by contract, have to utilize this particular remote access solution, and looked at how much that would cost, comparatively speaking, to if they do not and something were to happen. I'm just curious if you've had those discussions.
Personally, I haven't had a discussion like that one. We're usually focused on whether any security disclosure information is included in SLAs, or if there's any sort of clawback in the SLA, but not anything for comparative analysis. I don't even know if that would be our, if we would have a position on that.
Okay, thanks.
If there's no more questions, then please find me later. My name is Mackenzie Morris, by the way. I work at Dragos. I'll be around all week, so yeah.
Absent the OEMs supporting better remote access solutions, what is like the next one or two things that they need to start incorporating into their products and solutions to notably make a change in the ransomware landscape?
So your question was that what do OEMs need to do with remote access solutions to combat ransomware?
Yeah, correct. You mentioned one.
Yeah.
What's next?
So,
Thank you.
sorry, I'm not really sure I understand your question.
So you talked about some OEMs don't
Yeah.
necessarily put in the best remote access solution, and you need to meet them in the middle ground.
Yeah.
So I'm asking, like, what additionally should they be adding into their products, solutions, or capabilities we should be asking for to make a notable progress against the biggest threat, right, which you identified as ransomware?
Yeah, the thing that we would like is for our security vendors or OEM vendors that support our environments to use the preferred remote access solution of the company. So if I am an electric utility or a manufacturing facility or a chemical plant, and I have a security or an OEM vendor, I would like them to use, if I use Cisco AnyConnect, I would like them to also use Cisco AnyConnect. I'll provision them accounts. I'll send them an RSA token if I have to. I'll get them on Okta. But they should be using the same remote access solution that my company uses on the enterprise side because it lets me manage it better. The problem is that not every organization wants to support or have their vendor teams or their solutions architects using 4, 5, 6 different remote access solutions to support all customers. So you should be trying to standardize on a single remote access solution, whatever it is, for all remote access, including OT and your enterprise. Yeah. Yeah.
That's our company, and I don't particularly like being that person, but that's kind of like where I inherited the situation, right? So some of our customers are doing like you said, and they're like, hey, we want to standardize on BombGuard or something like that, and so in those cases, we're doing what they're asking, right? But for me as the OEM, I'd like to have one standard so I don't have to support a bunch of different things. So how do we find a middle ground?
So if you're an OEM and you don't want to support all of the remote access solutions that your customers use, so my answer to you as an OEM is that you want customers, and you should be willing to do what your customers want to get their business. So I'm taking a very asset owner side on this discussion and sort of pushing all of the responsibility back on OEMs. But that's how I feel, or that's what I think personally.
That makes sense. I just kind of want to get your take on it.
And this kind of follows up with what you're saying. As a customer, as an end user, I would say start a dialogue. Because we've got an OEM right now who's telling us we've got a solution. Say, we're not going to use that. And it wasn't, we don't want to use that. What can we do? It's we're not going to use what you have. And so we're struggling with that.
So the big thing for being an individual or an end user is that if you have a remote access solution for your company, you're typically paying license fees to BeyondTrust, Cisco, anything like that. So if you're an OEM that's requesting remote access, if you're not providing your own remote access solution to the customer free of charge, which tends to bring about the use of free remote access solutions by OEMs, you need to either be offering it as part of your business, or you should be getting on board since the end user already is paying for remote access service. All right, I really cannot see, but all right. I want to thank you all for coming. I know that we sort of ran through this really quickly, but please, if you have any questions or discussions about sort of coming up with unique solutions to solve problems, please find me around. So thank you very much. Oh.
just in our repertoire.
Oh.
We use Dragos.
Oh, cool.
And part of it is exactly what you mentioned up there. We've talked to a lot of people, and it's like the Dragos guys are passionate about it, and they're on the asset end user side more often than not. What I've seen, not just here's our sales